And hello and welcome back to Sable's WorldForge. This is part 2 of our show today. Let's see here, my camera is being wonky again. You see, the problem is my cat. In particular, one cat. She is the most playful and most active, and she insists upon crawling into the window ledge behind my computer. Whereupon she pulls the cord and knocks the camera right the hell off the stand. So then I have to readjust it. Okay. There we go. That was quick? Oh good. I'm glad it was quick. It felt like I was taking a long time to me. I was like, I gotta get it done because I gotta get back on. So, alright. So, this is basically just my usual Sable's WorldForge, which is we're going to answer world building questions, do showcases and critiques, and maybe if we get a chance, we're going to do some world building. I don't expect we're going to have a lot of chance to do that today, though, because quitting time is 4 o'clock, and I'm, because we also do our Toysoldiers old school campaign this evening, I kind of have to end it at 4, right? So I think we're just going, besides it's a lot of streaming and I gotta eat dinner, so we're gonna, we're gonna do what we can. If we get time to work on stuff, we'll work on stuff. I hope that the conlanging stream was very helpful to you guys. I'm going to give it a priority to upload to YouTube. I will put it like conlanging special in the title so that it's easy to find. And then that way it can be available as a resource if you guys want to recall back to it, which I certainly will be because I learned stuff from Toblin, and I hope you did too. I think he was really a great guest to have on. I always enjoy Toblin because he nerds out on the same shit that I nerd out on. So, and he usually knows more about it than I do, which is great because then I can learn stuff, which is fun. So I hope that we weren't too off topic. We were both afraid that we were going down way too many rabbit holes. But there's so much that's interesting about the subject that we just can't help but share it, right? Okay, good. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It's good that you always end on time on Sunday, says Amelie, that forces me to go to bed. Okay, help, I need edits, says Twinkle. Okay, here's the order in which we're going to do things. I got you, Twinkle. We're putting it up. But in the meantime, we have a question that is holding from Diane Wrights. Well, actually, it was asked on Diane Ashley Wrights, so it had to be held for today, from Barbarossa, about matriarchal and matrilineal societies, and I promised him an in-depth answer today. He has been waiting patiently for this, so I am going to address that. I think first, before I do that, I will do Kayatan's showcase and review, because his article is short, right? I took a look at it, and it doesn't look like it will take long, and I know Kayatan's got to go to bed because he's in Poland. So, we're gonna do that first, then we're gonna answer Barbarossa's question, and then we will do an edit. And that very well might take us to the end of the stream, so I would recommend holding off if you have any more showcases and whatnot that you'd like me to look at, to make sure that I do have time, okay? Yeah, we are all a bunch of nerds. The rabbit holes were fun, says Amelie. Yeah, I thought, I'm good. I'm glad you enjoyed it too. James tries to be good and not type in Game of Thrones reference. The Lappin' Holes, that's right. Oh, by the way, James, I don't know if you heard, but no, you weren't down that stream. Barbarossa was like, yeah, the House Guard of House Lappin, hoplites! I'm like, yes! Bad puns. I got you, Calutan. I got it. We're gonna do it. Yeah. Emily says, I finished plotting book 3 in my series. Awesome. I still need to do book 2. I put in it the ceremony I wrote about in my birthright article. That is awesome. I can't wait to see it. My edits are pretty short, says Twinkle. There should be space for one more. Let's make sure, right? Because sometimes things might take longer than I think they do. I'm terrible with that myself, and I really don't want anybody to put up their thing, use their points, right, and then have to remind me of it and make them post the link again in the next stream, right? Lauria says, this is not a rabbit hole I will get into, but it's really fun to hear people speak about it. Well, yeah, then you kind of got that stuff in the back of your mind when you're doing what you do need to do with it, right? So you can decide how much or how little of that you want to include, right? If you do want to develop a conlang with a few thousand words in it, right, with some really simple grammar rules like I did, then there is some, there's some technical terms that you do have to learn. But once you know what they mean, it's really not complicated. So, yeah, I'm really tempted to do it, says Emily, even if I won't actually need it. Well, you know what? Sometimes world building in and of itself is cool. People invest in Toblin's Patreon and in mine because of the world building, and part of that is the language. Like, that's one of the things, right? Recipes are another thing that I include. I don't need recipes. I put them on there because my patrons like it, and I like to know what's actually in the food that I'm talking about, right? And how it would actually taste, because if I have put a recipe of it on my site, I have made it and eaten it. So, Emily says, I just smash French sounds together to invent new words. Yeah, why not? I do that too, actually, and it can be fun that way. Alright, so let's get into the showcase. Yeah. Okay. I will go to the sprint screen so that people can do sprint timers if they want for working on stuff. I've decided to get out of the habit of using just the regular screen because maybe people actually do want sprint timers while the rest of us are chatting, and why shouldn't they have the opportunity? So this is from Calutan's World Magical Earth. Nexus of Magic. Nexus of Magic is the source of all magic on Earth. From it, magical energy travels to every living being on the planet. It is said that the first humans of the first civilization... Okay, what is the first civilization? An ancient human civilization from the time before the recorded history known today. Okay. Learned how to use magic from being in the Nexus. The sparse information about the first civilization suggests that you need another I in civilization after the V, it's a typo. Suggests that the Nexus was located in their capital, but the geographic location of it is lost. Localized phenomena. The Nexus is said to be a place with a high concentration of magical energy. According to myths and legends, there is a massive ball of magical energy. Because of that, any spell cast in the Nexus would be much stronger than spells cast outside. Some people even say that spells which have to be cast by multiple magic users could be cast by a single person in the Nexus. That's interesting. The amount of magical energy is also said to interfere with any technology which needs some kind of a wireless signal to function. Interesting. Type cave, location under Earth, and then a couple of links to your magical law article and the first civilization. That's cool. I'd really like to know more, though. Right? Like, are we sure it's only one place? Because this is very vague, which can be fine. What it means is that it's a myth or a legend. So if it's a myth or a legend, who tells this myth or legend? What culture or subculture is it associated with that tells the story about this? Have they got any ideas where it was located? Perhaps there are 2 or 3 competing theories on the subject, right? Like, I mean, legends like this have been pretty common in real life. And there are a lot of places that are supposed to be a nexus of magical energy. Some believe because ley lines cross over and form a place where a bunch of ley lines cross, and that's where magical energy is. Sedona is one of those places that's supposed to be like that, right? World navals are usually other spaces like that. Incidentally, the Kaaba, right? The place everybody has to pilgrimage to in Mecca and touch, right? Was a goddess associated Omphalos, a world naval, right? Before it was the Kaaba. So that's an interesting spot, right? There was a theory in the World of Darkness role-playing games that Jerusalem is a nexus of magical energy, and that's largely because a lot of different cultures associate it with their holy mythologies and tales, right? So, I just, it's a great idea. I'd just like to know more about it, like some of the competing legends, right? Has anyone made an attempt to find it, right? There's another thing, right? How about you say that technology which needs some kind of a wireless signal function doesn't work very well there, so how about the Bermuda Triangle? Is that theorized to be the spot where it is, right? Stuff like that. I think you could flesh it out a little, right? That's all. But the idea is really cool. Kayatan says, the place is real, but location is unknown, so it is almost a myth. Thank you. I needed some inspiration, he says. Well, good. I'm glad that I have pointed out a couple of areas that you could develop. And, great. That's awesome. Okay. There is a place, I'm pretty sure it actually exists, and I know it actually exists, and I'm pretty sure it's a mountain somewhere on the border between India and Tibet. I think that is supposed to be, it could be Tibet, I could be wrong here, but it's a place where gravity is actually less than it is in other places in the Earth. Did you know that? Did you know that we have gravity that is fluctuating, sort of, depending on where you are on the Earth? That is interesting, isn't it? Right? So, Arthur C. Clarke wrote a whole story around this about how people were building a space elevator on that spot for that reason, because it was the least, because of the lesser gravitational forces there, it was easier to build their space elevator, and it was actually right on a sacred site that they basically booted the people out of in order to do it, which brings up modern issues about indigenous Hawaiian sites and space telescopes, but just, related ideas. So cool. Okay, now let us talk about matrilineal societies and matriarchies. Barbarossa, are you still with us? There's also the Eye of Sahara. I don't think I've heard about that one. I better look that up. Maybe I'll do that while I'm waiting to see if Barbarossa is still here. I would rather talk to him directly, because it would be easier to... I just realized I killed the sprint timer, so I'm not thinking about things. I clicked it. Why didn't it work? Click. Ooh, neat. The Rikat structure, also called Goleb el Rikat, The Eye of Africa, Eye of Mauritania, or Eye of the Sahara is a prominent feature in the Sahara's Adrar Plateau near Ouradan, west central Mauritania, northwest Africa. Okay, wow, that's interesting. You want to talk about a world naval? That looks like one to me. Neat. Doesn't it look like city ruins? Yeah, it does, actually. Bedrock, yellow white sand, green vegetation, blue salty sediments. Slightly eroded, or deeply eroded, slightly elliptical dome with a diameter of 40 kilometers. Sedimentary rock exposed in this dome ranges in age from late Proterozoic within the center of the dome to Odosivian sandstone around its edges. Wow. Deep time shit. Spanning from the appearance of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere to just before the proliferation of complex life on Earth. Yeah, right. Exposed are a variety of intrusive and extrusive igneous rocks. Rhyolitic volcanic rocks, gabbros, carbonatites, and kimberlites. Okay. I actually know what all those are, because I've been reading about geology. Wow. It's not an impact structure. Huh, wow. Sure looks like that to me. Neat. Thank you. That was information I did not know. I am here, says Barbarossa. Okay. Awesome. Geology rocks, says Aaron. Yeah. Cayetan says, question. Should I write my World Anvil articles from the perspective of an omniscient narrator or unreliable, not knowing all narrator? I think you can kind of do both. I take a Wikipedia tone with my articles, right? And I go, okay, right? When you look up something that has contradictory legends in anything mythological, it'll say, you know, these people of this area say this. These people of that area say that, right? Sometimes it'll say some people say this and some people say that, and they don't specify who those some people are, right? They'll add things like, but this hasn't been confirmed through science or whatever. Yeah, if I want unreliable or a point of view, I use quotes, says Barbarossa. Also useful. And I've done that, and I've written some things from, right, and Aaron especially has written some things from a particular point of view, so it depends. Okay, so, matriarchies and matrilineal cultures, right? And if anybody has anything to add in the chat, feel free, because why not, right? For those who don't know the terms, matriarchy means that women are in charge. Yes, I was waiting for you, Barbarossa, before I got into it, right? So, because I promised you a detailed answer, right? Okay, so matriarchy is women are in charge, right? We live in a patriarchy, right? Where men usually are in charge. Right? You know, we all know this, right? We all know that there's a gap between what men and women typically are allowed to achieve financially and in terms of their rights and in terms of their, you know, access. Like, it even has effects with things like, all the studies always seem to be done in medicine on men first, and then they try to either shoehorn what affects women, or they do the studies on women later, right? So women generally cannot trust any health information that's out there. It's usually, we have to question it. Does it work the same for women, right? Have they done that study? Look that up, right? Maybe they haven't, right? If they have, what were the biases of the person doing the study? Remember, the Victorians used to think that our wombs made us emotional and therefore hysterical, and it was just a case of being female that did that, right? So, okay, which brings us to our first point about matriarchies. This is likely to be true in a matriarchy as well, except that there will be reversals. Those reversals may not be the same thing, right? So perhaps men have a reputation for being emotional in a matriarchy. That would be something that would be kind of a reversal. But perhaps they have a reputation for being kind of stupid, right? Because, well, you know, with all their testosterone and all that emotional, hormonal shit, they clearly can't think clearly. So women should be in charge of politics because they can think better. I mean, what would happen if we let a man on a submarine and he happened to be, you know, having a testosterone fluctuation? I mean, he might just get full of rage and blow everything up, right? You know, and there's nukes on those subs, so we can't have that. Yeah. Right? So that could be a thing, right? Or maybe it's still... Okay. Barbarossa asks, so if I have sexual dimorphism in my race where women are larger, more defined, while men are smaller and less defined in appearance, is that sexist or bad? No, but it makes me tired. Okay, right? No, it's not sexist or bad, right? You're talking about a different species, and different species will have different physiologies that will work in different ways. However, I get really tired and bored quickly of the idea that being bigger means you get to be in charge of civilization. It's not true even in our own world. There are lots of places that are exceptions to this, right? And I don't see why it should be true in fantasy worlds either. I don't think it's necessary to create a matriarchy, right? And the reason why it makes me tired is because there is a particular brand of behavioral psychologist or sociologist or biologist who uses this to justify patriarchy. Right? Well, men are bigger, so clearly, you know, when it comes to the fisticuffs, you know, men are in charge because they can just, you know, beat up the women if they don't want to do, which is a real oversimplification of biology in the first place, because just because that might be an overall average doesn't mean there aren't lots of exceptions. Right? What if all the female fighter types in the world, all the female boxers, got together with all the female cops, who all tend to be fairly big and tall that I've met, right, and decide, you know what, we're going to create an army and we're going to assert the rights of women over the rights of men? Who would be able to stop them, right? It would be, you know, like, and besides the point, is it really necessary that being able to beat up somebody is the requirement for the thing that makes you a leader in civilization? I will point out that there is a book called The Secret History of the Mongol Queens. This was a book that was a history book that was maintained by the Mongolian Empire at its height, right? And there is a popular science book that researched it, right? It was the belief of Genghis Khan that men are good for fighting and women are good for organizing and being in charge, right? So although technically there was a male ruler of a lot of places in the Mongolian Empire, it was often the women who ran everything. Their position was just as important, just different. Like how the Romans had, you know, the war leader, right? What is the term I'm looking for? Dux Pacium or something, the peace leader, and Dux Valorum, right? The war leader. right? And they had equal power, just different responsibilities, right? When the nation was at peace, the guy in charge of the, general peaceful politics was in charge. And when there was war, the guy who was in charge of the war was in charge. Right? Now, in their cases, of course, all men, because Romans and, women are basically good for breeding in Roman culture, so whatever. But there's no reason why that couldn't exist. Like in the Mongolian Empire, it did exist. Women had one role, which was diplomacy, leading in peace, bureaucracy, organizing, stuff like that. They were thought to be better at that, right? And the men were in charge in war. So what I'm saying is there are lots of other reasons why that might be necessary, all right? Or that might evolve, right? I was kind of basing it off actual birds. That's the only reason why. Right? Amelie has a good response to that. If everything is just reversed, it gets kind of boring since you just exchange the name men and women. Right? Right? So that's the thing, right? And I find it interesting that you immediately, right? And I'm not blaming you, and I'm not picking on you, because this is a common thought process that runs through a lot of academic literature, which I question deeply because of its biases, right? Oh, well, in this species, the women are bigger than the men, so clearly they're in charge, right? Not necessarily, right? Now, so I would say if you're going to have that, right, with the sexual dimorphism, which would be consistent with a lot of bird species, right? And I like the fact that you're doing the colorful plumage stuff with men. Here's I would suggest flipping stereotypes in some places. So here's a stereotype you can flip. Men are vain. They are concerned constantly about preening their appearance. They're always worried about looking good, right? And the males in our bird culture here are only valued for their sexual attractiveness as their primary characteristic upon which they are judged. That would be a switch of the real world, right? At least the culture I grew up in. So, that's something where you could really... So, maybe there's all kinds of perfumes and beauty products that are being sold to your male birds, and maybe everything related to that costs a third more to buy for male birds, even though it's the same fucking thing, because they figure that they can get more money out of you because it's more culturally important for you to look good, right? So that's the thing. Good night, Kaya-chan. I knew you had to go to bed soon. Sleep well. So, yeah. So that would be a logical one, right? I actually have that men like to decorate themselves in large shiny stones and trinkets. That's cool, but listen to what I'm saying, right? Listen to the stereotypes, right? Not just, oh, the men like to decorate themselves in shiny stones and trinkets. Yeah, that's cool. Most humans, male or female, like to decorate themselves in shiny stones and trinkets, I've found. But there's just rules about what's considered shiny that is different between men and women in our cultures. But, but also the prejudices associated with that, right? Because that might be a thing. Maybe men are assumed to be more vain and more concerned about their physical appearance. Women are often blamed for our obsession with our physical appearance. And to some degree, that is true because we enforce those standards on each other too, right? But it's a cultural thing. It has nothing to do with our actual programmed behavior, right? It is not genetic. Yeah, men used to wear makeup and flashy clothes too before, points out Emily. Yeah, and that's another thing, right? There is culture in Africa, wish I could remember the name. If somebody knows, would please tell me, right? But basically how it works is that the women pick their husbands, right? And women inherit the property, right? So when the women inherit the property, men are valued for how pretty they are. Just like we do in the patriarchy, right? Where if the men own the property, the women are valued for how pretty they are. This is changing in our modern world because in most places in the world now, women can own property, usually in their own right. Give it a couple generations, and these prejudices that we have are likely to fade. They fade more every generation, right? Yeah, at least in the culture I grew up in, says Laria, women are terrible to each other. I have a theory about that, by the way. I don't know if you guys want me to get into my theory about that. It does have a relationship to the discussion, but it's one of those nerd rabbit holes like the conlanging ones, right? So, yeah. So that's the thing, right? Who owns the property and who inherits the property is where I, personally think, based on looking into other cultures. Now, you are a historian. Maybe you don't think that, but if you don't, I would ask you to, question the literature a little, right? Good night, James. Right? Who wrote it? I think the whole theory, the whole field of sociology and a lot of our analysis of history is tainted by sexism and racism at its core, right? And colonialism. So I think a lot of it needs to be re-examined. But who owns the property, who inherits the property, often has a bearing on who has the power. But not necessarily. Right? Now we're getting into matrilineal, right? Matrilineal means that descent is determined by the female line. I have a weird situation among my Orcish culture where the descent is matrilineal, but they live in a patriarchy, right? And gender tensions are something I actually do get into in the book. Now, you don't have to do this. This is just one species in one world, Barbarossa. You don't need to worry about all of that if you don't want to. Right? I'm just kind of encouraging you to do a couple of things that break the typical stereotypes. Neither should you directly reverse the sexism, right? Nor should you be unwilling to reverse it, right? Because that's another thing that, okay, there was a book called The Chalice and the Blade by a woman named Rianne Eiler. This was a very influential book in women's studies for a long time. And basically the theory was that women are naturally peaceful and men are naturally warlike. And of course, every person in the chat here who has ever had anything to do with the LGBTQ community whatsoever is going, fuck that, right? Of course, fuck that, right? And that's nonsense. I'm a very warlike person. Yeah, I agree with you, Laria. Women are not really peaceful. Women are culturally discouraged from the time they are infants from being loud or physically aggressive. Men are encouraged to be loud and physically aggressive from the time they are infants. So it becomes an almost instinctive training. This is something that's very difficult for us to get over in the modern culture. We're trained to obey those rules of what is acceptable terms of engagement when we have a conflict, right? Before we learn potty training, right? So it's really hard for us to break that conditioning sometimes, right? Jamie, my partner, tells me that he used to run a women's self-defense course out of his dojo because it was very popular. He was a martial arts teacher for a very long time, had his own business, right? And that's the get back to work if you're sprinting call, by the way, right? And he told me that his hardest thing with that class was getting women to be willing to hit with their full power, because we pull the punch. And we pull the punch because we're trained not to be aggressive physically, right? And it's done before we potty train, right? Okay, why does this matter? This may not be present in your matriarchal, matrilineal culture, right? Why would that be a thing? They wouldn't be discouraged from that. Honestly, the little bit you see of Themyscira in the Wonder Woman movies there is a good example of that. Those women are not afraid to hit anything. They are loud, they are athletic, right? They have constant physical, contests and whatnot. They probably get into fistfights more often. And, that could be a thing if you don't have that cultural training, right? On the other hand, is your culture matriarchal, matrilineal, because women are viewed as being more peaceful? Maybe that's considered a good thing in your culture, in which case they would have that cultural training not to be physically aggressive. Right. So, yeah, Lauria says, I do have problems with that. Just asking for help on anything is difficult. Exactly. We're all like this, right? We're also trained not to interrupt men. It's terrible. And it's not their fault. It's not the men's fault. Don't blame them for that. That's us. That's on us. We picked that up from our cultural training, and we teach it to each other. Right? Barbarossa says, so my Harpies culture is taking a lot of warrior culture elements, as I kind of like to picture them like the Celts, with their war paint and such at first, and their quick hack and slash tactics. Okay, so I definitely think that descriptions of, the mythology of the Amazons, right? Themyscira as depicted in the Wonder Woman movies, right? And these could be good inspirations, right? You could also read a bit about some of the Celtic traditions. Now, granted, the Celts were a patriarchy, and hello, Darth, good to see you back. I'm glad you liked the Con Lang stuff, and thanks, Daz, I'm glad you did too. That's awesome. That's what we're here for. I did too, right? But okay, there were women warriors among the Celts. There were women warriors among the Norse, right? There are a lot of Asian women warriors. A lot. Like, I think something like 3/4 of the names that I have seen in this topic have been Asian names. I recommend looking it up a bit more, right? So your type, the Harpies, are okay, like the Celts with the war paint and such at first, and their quick hack and slash tactics. Perhaps they worship the Morrigan, right? Who is a savage warrior goddess associated with birds, right? Yeah, Toblin seemed to be having fun too. I agree, right? So yeah, right? Like, okay, so your culture is a warrior culture, right? Your Harpies are warrior women, right? In this case, I would do what I suggested with switching the whole, okay, it's men who are all worried about their appearance and valued for that, not necessarily for their abilities in war. Okay, Barbarossa says, but as I look at them, the reason I wanted them to be more matrilineal, was because of this idea of cultural defense. The Harpies are the smallest race naturally from the New World. They are 6 feet tall, and so they look to the larger, stronger of the sexes to defend them in war. However, the men build, farm, and defend the home, while are also brighter in color. Well, fair enough, but I caution against having such a drastic cultural shift, if that's why it happened so quickly. Because it doesn't, unless it's opposed by oppression, right? If it did, then we would not be having arguments about the abortion debate, okay? Because the need for controlling the bodies and fertility of women has long since passed any evolutionary advantage or cultural advantage it might once have had, right? But there are still places in the world that feel that they should have the right to legislate what women can and cannot do with their bodies, right? Obviously, we haven't outgrown that cultural nonsense yet. So I really doubt that they would have been an egalitarian culture that all of a sudden decided, oh, you guys are bigger, you defend us against the invaders, and all of a sudden they're culturally in charge. Nobody would do that, right? People don't share power easily. They won't give it up unless they have to, right? So I don't think they would voluntarily subjugate themselves. They might involuntarily have subjugated themselves. Maybe the women banded together and asserted their control over the society generations ago. Maybe there was a time when men were rare. I disagree, Laria. I absolutely disagree. No, that would be more a patriarchal society that uses women as warriors. No, not necessarily, right? Because one of the big reasons why women have been historically oppressed is because we have been forced off the battlefield, right? The ability to have and the justification was, well, they make the babies, right? Plus they're smaller and weaker than us, so we don't really want them there. We want them at home making babies, right? So the right to assert oneself on the battlefield does have a great deal to do with egalitarianism, right? Which we're seeing in the modern era, right? Because modern weapons, it's a gun. Any human being is capable of picking it up and pointing it at someone and hitting the trigger, right? So, it's we're not as concerned about it, except in dinosaur militaries that have yet to get over the idea that women might be more peaceful, which is nonsense, right? But there is no physical reason whatsoever that women are not just as capable of being soldiers. I will point out, as I have done many times in many conversations in various social media forums, that the Canadian military has been fully co-ed since the 1980s. You go ahead and ask either of my partners, who both served in various branches of Canadian forces, or my good friend Graham, whether they thought the women they served with were any less capable a soldier or a sailor than they were. It'll be an interesting conversation, right? So no, I don't agree with that necessarily at all, right? Like, that's one of the powers. The power to defend oneself physically, right, is one of the rights that I think that we should be including in women's rights, Barbarossa says it's kind of more egalitarian for the most part, but certain roles are expected by one sex. There are male soldiers, just as some women stay home to help the villages. Yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, the gender line doesn't have to be entirely unbreakable. It certainly isn't in our culture, right? There's lots of wavy bits. So, Daz says, I can see a time when males were less numerous because due to their brighter plumage were more easily targeted by an enemy. That is a good point. And contrary to popular belief, our observation of cultures is when one gender becomes less numerous, they lose rights rather than gain them, right? As China has selected for more male babies and female population has dropped, the limitations of what women can do and the rights their families have had over them have changed considerably, and not for the better, right? So, yeah. Daz says that's a good point and a reason why they were pushed away, or actually not Daz, Amelie says to Daz, that's a good point and a reason why they were pushed away from the battlefield. I agree that this is a very good biological reason to evolve it so that males are not on the battlefield, Barbarossa, right? Yeah, if they're brighter plumage, they're more easily targeted. So that does make sense. Maybe they always did less of that sort of thing, intercultural warfare, or less of the obvious hunting because they were less camouflaged, right? So you know, that it was easier to enforce that cultural shift. Unfortunately, cultural, like, the rights of people are not a progression constantly, right? Often there's regressions too. Yeah, it's for their own good, says Emily. Exactly, right? We keep seeing, I tend to associate this with religious extremist groups that tend to have, you know, I would classify them as right-wing types, but it's not, you know, necessarily, but it tends to be more right-wing types, like far right I'm talking about, you know, like they'll take over an area and then all of a sudden we have restrictions on women's rights. Like, as the rise of the evangelicals has occurred in American politics, there are more and more restrictions on access to abortion, health care, access to women's resources for things like, you know, leaving abusive relationships, right? All of a sudden, trans people aren't allowed to be in the military, you know, right? In Afghanistan, when the Taliban began to rise, and that's before they came to American real attention, right? Women slowly and gradually lost rights, you know. So this could be, my point here is that this could be associated with some kind of religious extremist group, which also tends to do well when times are apocalyptic, right? When things are bad, people get scared, they hold on to a theory where, you know, black and white, right and wrong becomes much simpler, right? And therefore it becomes easier to hold on to that. So maybe there was always a bit of a gender inequality in the society, both for the biological reasons of better, smaller, and brighter plumage, but also because women owned the property, right? And it just became worse after these invasions with the constant warfare. So there's my suggestions, right? That are specific to your world, right? Taking the overall look at things, right? So I mean, it perfectly justifies the ideas you had, right? It's just, you know, I would suggest that as in-world specific stuff. And you gotta be, and I guess it also illustrates you gotta be careful with subject matter like this, right? Because you may inadvertently end up with people on soapboxes that you didn't intend to get started on soapboxes, right? Yeah, maybe their combat tactics are based on females being better able to hide in ambushes, like female lions are better hunters than the males, points out Daz. Yeah, that's true, but remember that sentient or sapient beings can change the odds on that one. Like, suppose that the boys decided they wanted to come hunting with the women, so they painted their plumage all with charcoal and hunted at night, right? Or they painted their plumage over with mud and stuck bits of grass on it, which is something we call a ghillie suit, and then used that to make themselves less able to be found, right? Because they're smart. They may figure out ways around this. I suppose that it doesn't mean that the cultural prejudices wouldn't have existed and remained far past the time they would have been useful, however. So. All right. Have I helped at all, Barbarossa? Or am I just making things more confusing? Oh yeah, covering themselves in mud, they'd find flying very difficult. That's true. That's the sprint for those of you sprinting, right? But you know, painting themselves with India ink or charcoal could be done. They could still fly. They, you know, dye their feathers. We're going on a hunting trip. We're gonna dye our feathers. You know. Hey, Stretch. Good to see you. Twinkle Toes has been listening in fascination. I'm glad that somebody is finding it helpful or interesting. Right? Daz says, maybe male plumage makes it harder to fly like peacocks. Yes, that could very well be the case too. Yes, peacocks. Can you just imagine trying to fly with that big awkward tail? Wow. Barbarossa says, yes, a lot. I will have to be very careful as I work on them, but I will probably come back to you if I hit a wall. Awesome. I'm here. I'm happy to talk about it. If you got a brief question, you can always message me in the Discord, right? If you want something more elaborate, I'm happy to discuss it here. Yeah, I would like to point out something very interesting about humans biologically. Here's where they like censor my... Oh, perfect, Esong's here. Just as I'm about to explain something about detailed sexual anatomy aspects that are kind of an interesting subject about humans, right? Barbarossa says, I did make a note that males in his bird species have brighter colors and larger plumage. Their claws and teeth are smaller and duller. That makes sense. Yeah, but I was worried that was dumb. No, it's perfectly fine, right? Maybe they didn't tend to do as much of the hunting, right? Maybe there's less of them, right? You don't have to make it that there's less of them. Maybe they just didn't do as much of the hunting in the evolution of the species, right? Okay, so human penises are too big. There it is. They're actually very awkward anatomically. They limit what we're capable of doing in certain situations and make it necessary for us to cover up our genitals if we're going to go into, like, low underbrush or anything like that. So the question is why, right? Because it's like a peacock tail, right? It's a show-off display. It's entirely intended to attract women, to attract females for reproduction. That's really what it's for, right? Reptile anatomy makes much more sense. Yeah. Breasts are also too big and awkward. Why the hell we have them, I don't know. It's ridiculous. All I can say is there must have been a period of human evolutionary history where the world was out to kill us, and we evolved everything possible to try to increase reproductive options. I mean, no other species has, like, cycles of heat every month, Yes, that's another thing too, actually, Laria, and you're right. But the question is, why not? That's weird, isn't it? Also because sperma cannot survive at the normal human body temperature. That's true, right? So testicles have to be farther away from the body, right? That is why they're on the outside. But that's weird. Like, why? Yep, Daz says maybe the growing of the fancy plumage for the bird species takes more bioresources, so that explains lesser teeth and claws. Yeah, or maybe they just didn't develop as much teeth and claws because, maybe what they ate didn't require sharp teeth, herbivores and such like that, says Esong, which is a good point. Like, maybe because they, maybe the birds are omnivores, right? And for generations, the females hunted because they had the more camouflaged plumage, and the males gathered stuff, right? So they have, like, those kind of hooked beaks that are good for nut cracking, or, and there wouldn't be that much difference, like, overtly between male and female beaks, right? But there would be slight shifts where maybe the males is a little more narrow so they can get inside to foliage and get, like, fruit and berries and things. And the females needs to be a bit sharper and more curved and broader because they need to, like, attack prey. Oh, good night, Laria. Always a pleasure. Thank you, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And that's the sprint to get back to work if you're sprinting. Okay, I think I have half an hour left. I think I'm going to go and do Twinkle's edit now. You see what I mean about maybe this will take longer than I thought, so perhaps we should not do another showcase until we're sure? Alright. So you need an edit, is what you're looking for, you said. So you want my opinion and you want me to go through and correct things. This is what I am hearing? It's totally fine, Barbarossa. You're quite welcome. I'm happy to help, and I hope it has been helpful, and I knew other people would want to consider the question as well, right? It's something that comes up a lot, so, you know. And I also like to, I have a bit of a soapbox in that I like to get people to question the assumptions that we may have all learned in high school, right? Okay, so this is Twinkle Toes the Berserker's story, The Fae Will Take Your Name. I think I've read this. Yes, I read this. Flash fiction, right? You know, I don't know if this is going to take very long, Twinkle. I didn't think there was a lot I wanted to suggest that you fix, but let's go over it. I liked this story. Stay away from Fae circles, child. The Fae will take your name from you, and even your own mother will not know what to call you. That was... Sorry. Yeah. No, that's not what I wanted to say here. Just a second. That was what her grandfather would tell her. I realize we say it like that's what a grandfather would tell her, and if you put it in quotation marks, then I would not have corrected it, right? Because it's dialogue, and people talk like they talk. But it is in the prose part, right? And therefore you need past tense, because everything else is in past tense. That is a contraction for that is, not that was. Okay, that was what her grandfather would tell her as they skirted the edge of a strange circle in the middle of the forest. She remembered this during all her rambling through the woods as a child, even as a teenager, and stayed away from the circle. When she grew up and went to college, she forgot. Now... Do you have a word count limit here with the story? It looks like it is particularly flash fiction, like it's intended to be below 1,000 words or something? Right? If so, she forgot is good enough. If it is not, then you may want to expand on what exactly forgot about it. Maybe? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not married to either outcome. I'm not gonna do edits and tell you you're doing it wrong, because I don't really know what your intention is there, right? Okay, it was a hot summer night towards the end of college, and she was home with her parents. You shared this on Darth Nicholas's stream or Siobhan's stream, and I read it then. Like, I was reading along as... I think it was Darth was reading it, and I enjoyed it. You have not shared it here. You're still quite welcome to share it here. I will put the link in the chat, actually. Or should I? So that people can read along. Oh, and then I fucked up the link. Oh well. Yeah, I remember reading this. Loved this so much. It was a random flash fiction. Thank you. So there's the link if you guys want to read along. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was a hot summer night towards the end of college, and she was home with her parents. She said something. It just slipped out. And then she was running through the woods with her father's voice still ringing in her ears. "You're no child of mine!" Tears prickled at her eyes. I notice it's giving me a grammar issue. Yeah, consider changing to pricked. Yeah, either would work. I think prickled is fine. Tears prickled at her eyes and branches lashed at her arms as she ran. She realized she was going to break an ankle if she didn't start watching where she was going. She slowed to a walk, wiping at her face. Only then did she see. She was standing in the middle of the wide circle. Old fear rose in her. Maybe within her? I'll suggest that. Okay, old fear rose within her. Rose in her mouth. Oh, sorry, for some reason I didn't see. Okay, old fear rose in her mouth, and she whirled to go back the way she came. She had come. Because now we need to switch to the past perfect because she already did that, right? Okay, she yelped and backed up a pace when she found a strange, man-like creature standing behind her. Neat. Yeah, man-like creature is cool. It's more descriptive than humanoid, which sounds very clinical. Okay, I like it. His hair was green. His skin, under the full moonlight, was the same color as the sky at dusk and patterned with lavender stripes like a cat. Comma there, I think. His eyes were a blazing orange color like fire and glowed brightly with a strange light. You got about 5 things in that sentence that tell me his eyes are glowing. And I'm not sure how to... You may want to compress it a little bit, right? I'm not sure, but, you know, pick the metaphors you like the best or find ways to put them together. His eyes were a blazing orange color like fire. So we have blazing, we have fire, we have glowed, we have brightly, and we have light. These are all things that tell us that the eyes are light. How brightly do they glow? Right? So, maybe I would say something like his eyes were a blazing orange color like fire, and like fire, they glowed. Something like that, right? But it's totally up to you. Okay, foolish mortal, the fey creature intoned. I like intoned, by the way. I like that verb. I have gotten in shit for that verb as a dialogue tag, and they can bite me. Because that's a good word, intoned. You're like, foolish mortal, right? You know immediately you're a deep shit, right? Okay. You have stepped into our circle. That needs either a double dash or it requires a semicolon. Comma is not correct there. Yeah, you have stepped into our circle. Now you must pay the toll. Give me your name and trespass here no more. I like it. She licked her lips, opened her mouth, and then stopped. She hadn't come to this part yet. Frantic, she glanced around the clearing. Stalling will do you no good, mortal. Speak. It's, Leaf? The fey creature eyed her suspiciously. Okay, here you have inconsistent capitalization. You do not capitalize fey here, and you do capitalize it here. I believe you need to pick one. So... you could argue that fey, uncapitalized, is an adjective, and fey capitalized is a noun speaking of a type of person. And I would think that was legit. But in a flash fiction story, you don't really have time to explain that, and it just seems like you missed something somewhere. If you want to do that, then I would take the uncapitalized one and spell it more traditionally, right? So either, here, I will comment, come on now. Either Fae, like with the E, which also has an LGBTQ connotation, so may be appropriate, right? Or Fae would be another option. Those are the ways they have traditionally been written. I realize that a lot of urban fantasy's been spelling it like this with the AE, right? And I think they've been doing it largely because it looks more archaic to our modern English eyes and looks more like a species name. But the adjectives look like that, depending on which version of English you're looking at, and either would work in that if you intended to keep it as an adjective, but these ones where it is capitalized here, you're looking at it like a noun, right? And that's fine if that's what you want to do. Okay. The Fey creature eyed her suspiciously. What jest is this? She shook her head. No, you're right. Sorry. Stick? That sounds stupid. Okay. Pedal? No. The Fey creature blazed with an eerie green light. Yeah, okay, so let's highlight that one too, actually, because notice that when you would think about it in comparison to your highlighted sentence there, you also have glowed brightly with a strange light, blazed with an eerie green light, blazing orange color. It's a bit repetitious, right? Now, and it doesn't sound like poetic repetition to me. Maybe that was your intention, but that is not how it's coming across here. So, okay. I mean, you are a poet, so I sometimes do poetic repetition in my prose too. Give me your name, impertinent mortal, or I will take your very life from you. I haven't got one yet. She burst into tears and hid her face in her hands. Listen, I'm trans, okay? I've had a horrible night. I accidentally came out to my parents, and they kicked me out, and I didn't even know I was here, and I have no idea what my name is, so... Love it, by the way. She waited for the crack of doom, for the creature to kill her, but it didn't come. She lifted her face from her hands and looked at him. He was still eerie, still terrifying. There, the repetition is good, it works, right? Still terrifying, but the light in his eyes looked somehow more sympathetic. You've been describing things by color implying mood up to this point. Perhaps the light in his eyes had changed. You could use color symbolism there. I'm not married to that. I'm just throwing that out there in case that's something that you might want to do, right? But the light in his eyes was now pink, or, you know, and that seemed more sympathetic somehow. I don't know, whatever. That's badly put, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? He smiled with a mouth full of shark teeth, but this smile was almost reassuring. Child, I told me to give me your name, the Fey creature said again. She sighed. Look, I haven't got one. No, girl, listen to me. Give me the name your parents gave you. It will trouble you no more. No more will it follow you. You will be free to pick another one that suits you better, be it lichen, moss, or mushroom. Oh. She spat a name then, her voice filled with hatred. The Fey creature nodded once and disappeared in a blazing flash of green light. We have blazing in green again. I am starting to think that this is poetic repetition. Maybe I am mistaken. Interesting. Okay. Quickly, she ran to the edge of the circle and out of it. That's the end of the sprint for those of you sprinting. I'll repeat the line. Quickly, she ran to the edge of the circle and out of it. Then she stopped, remembering her manners, and turned. Thank you, she called into the circle. More like, thank you! There was no answer, and she turned and walked slowly back towards her parents' house. She would need to at least go and get her school bag. She would need that for the fall semester of school. She could always crash at Kenny's house. He would understand, maybe. She walked into the light of the yard and heard a soft cry. She looked up. Her mother moved from the doorway where she had been waiting and rushed towards her, taking her hands as if to warm them. I think you should separate this sentence and rush towards her. She took her hands as if to warm them. Mother took her hands as if to warm them, maybe. I'll just type that in there, but you can always reject the suggestion, right? So I'll say this so it's less confusing. Took her hands as if to warm them. She felt her eyes filled with tears. Did this mean she wasn't angry? Oh, I've been so worried about you, her mother fussed. Don't worry about what that man said before you ran outside. Humph! Please, come inside. Oh! Her mother's eyes went wide. I can't even recall your... What's that term I was just reading? Your dead name. I guess it never really suited you. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. I'll help you pick out something new, something good. This was too much, and she found herself crying again. And I love that, by the way. Love it. A year later, now a graduate, she was walking through the woods. She was thinking about that summer night, and all that had changed for the better. She found a boy sitting on a rock, looking troubled, and she thought she recognized the look on his face. She had worn it often enough. Are you lost? She asked. New paragraph. Always start new paragraph when a new speaker is speaking. The boy looked up, startled. I'm Acacia. I'm visiting my mom. She's just over the hill. What's your name? He frowned, looking almost pained. Oh, sorry, just a minute. Right, yes. I see why you didn't change it. Okay, I still suggest this. For two reasons. One is that I originally looked at it and thought that it was somebody else speaking because the question and it looked like a question and reply, right? The second reason I would suggest this is because it creates a little bit more dramatic pause, right? So, I'm Acacia. I'm visiting my mom. She's just over the hill. What's your name? He frowned, looking almost pained. Andrew, no. I mean, Craig, maybe? She laughed. I know the feeling. It took me a while to settle on Acacia. Hey, listen, there's this place. She took his hand and drew him through the woods. And by the way, that is a beautiful story, and I absolutely adore it. Are you sending this to the Queer Futures anthology? Because I sure as fuck would love to see it. That is great. Feedback, it's beautiful, it's moving. I think you can identify with it, whether you have ever questioned your gender identity or not. I think that anyone who has ever felt out of place or misunderstood would totally identify with it. So it has broad appeal. You can tell you put your heart in it. I love it. Okay, if you're going back to the highlighted portions, if you're intending, it's going in hindsight. Okay, cool. If you're going to submit it to the Queer Anthology, you likely will not be able to put it in hindsight, because usually those contracts involve a period of exclusivity, and it usually is somewhere between a year to 6 months to a year that you can't publish it anywhere else except for where you first published it in English, right? So you may not want to do that. On the other hand, it's a lovely story, and that's the growl, by the way, of Get Back to Work. But you've only got 10 minutes. I'll be shutting it off early because that'll be the 4 o'clock. I mean, there are some respected names in science fiction and fantasy, particularly with a queer bend, who are going to be kind of headlining that anthology, so it might be a good way to get seen. I don't know. But be true to you, right? This is part of your project, your concept, your vision for Hindsight, and I think it's lovely, and regardless of what you do with it, I think it's great. So I really enjoyed the story. I did submit to the Queer Anthology with a story about Sammy. Cool. Good luck to you. I hope you get in. I submitted two. I had a flash fiction piece that I had lying around. They said they took reprints, so it's a reprint, and I hadn't done anything with it. Its period of exclusivity has passed. It fit their concept. We'll see what happens. I'm not rejected yet, so we'll see, says Twinkle. Yeah, you never know. I don't know. Good luck. I hope it works out. I have collected a lot more rejections in my life than I have acceptances. That's part of the job. It depends on what their vision is for the anthology, so. Alright. Well, it's 10 minutes to 4, and I realize that my start time is 4 o'clock, but to be honest with you, I'm very sore now, and I'm kind of exhausted. And I would really like to get some food in my face before we start our game tonight. So I think I would like to quit now. Is anybody else on? Let's see here. Stretch is starting shortly. Okay. Thanks for all the suggestions, guys. Thanks for everyone who came today. I hope you enjoyed it. I did too. Long story, but can't just been allowed home, says Stretch. It's just you're on the schedule there, man. I was just making sure I wasn't skipping you over. Darth is on, but he's doing Stream Raiders. Bigfoot Bjornsson is on. Cobalt Press is doing a DPG. That's cool. Cobalt Press won't notice me at all, I'm sure, if I do a raid. Well, you know what? Let's raid Bigfoot. If you haven't checked him out before, Conlang stuff was really helpful. I'm looking forward to watching the Conlang VOD. Yeah, Tomlin was amazing, as always, and I really hope that, you guys will get a lot out of it. So definitely check it out. Okay, so you guys all know Darth Nicholas's address, I'm sure, but I'm going to give it again just because maybe somebody is new who is watching that doesn't normally watch this channel. Right, so yeah, happy to help there, Twinkle. I hope it was helpful. It was actually very clean copy, very little to edit, so I think you're good to go. Right, E-Songs, this says thanks, but thank you. Cobalt Press are pretty good with the raids. Yeah. Alright, I'll take a vote. Here's how we're gonna do it. That'll probably take me to the end of the time anyway. Duration 1 minute. Get your vote in. Yikes, Stretch. Huh. Doesn't sound like much fun, being kicked out in the cold because armed response. I would like to thank Dinosaur Bob for renewing his subscription today. That was pretty awesome. And I would also like to thank Johnny Sin 6969 for the follow, by the way. Which all happened in the middle of the conversation, and I couldn't just kind of stop. Also, thank you, Hefe, for the hosting and the rating. And thank you, Scribblers Society, for the raid and the host yesterday. That was really awesome. Also, Twinkle raided us yesterday, which is really nice. So, oh, and Loria for the Prime subscription. Awesome, guys. Much appreciated. All right, so apparently we are raiding Cobalt Press. Is that I haven't been to their Twitch channel. Is that the address of their Twitch channel? Cobalt Press, all one word? Do they have a space in between? How does that work? Okay, I'll just try it like that since nobody's responding to me. Probably there's lag. Alright, thanks everyone for joining me today. We're going to see Cobalt Press. They produce some really neat gaming products. My husband is a patron of them and has been for some time. Right, and I will see you guys later tonight for Toysoldiers, our campaign, and if not, then we'll see you on Tuesday for Ask an Old GM. Game tonight starts at 5:30 Pacific, which is 2:30 a.m. GMT, and is it? No, 1:30 a.m. GMT. And on Tuesday, Ask an Old GM starts at 2 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. GMT. No. Yeah. Yeah, I had that right. Okay. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you again. Bye. Don't forget a raid call. Prepare to be boarded.